everyone, my name's Eva and today I'm going to be telling you one of my favourite stories of all time. This is the story of Peter Pan. Our story begins in London with the Darling family. There was Mr. and Mrs. Darling and their 3 children, Wendy, John and Michael Darling. The children slept in the nursery and every night before bed, Wendy would tell the children stories about Peter Pan. Peter was a little boy who ran away to Neverland so that he never had to grow up. Wendy's stories were all about Peter's adventures, how he would battle with pirates and fly across the sky with his fairy Tinkerbell. John and Michael loved Wendy's stories, but nobody loved the stories as much as Peter himself. Every night, Peter would hide outside the nursery window and listen in to the stories that were all about him. But one night, he leaned in too far and Wendy spotted him. She ran over to talk to him, but Peter flew away so fast that he was separated from his shadow. Well, this pleased Wendy because she knew that this meant he would have to return. And sure enough, the next night, Peter came back to reclaim his shadow. Wendy very kindly sewed the shadow back onto Peter, and as a thank you, Peter invited her to Neverland. He told her that he lived with the Lost Boys and that they would love to hear Wendy's stories. "What are the Lost Boys?" asked Wendy. Peter explained that the Lost Boys were little boys who were once lost in Kensington Gardens, and they came to the Neverland and never had to grow up, just like Peter. Wendy agreed to come to Neverland just as long as her brothers, John and Michael, could come too. Peter said yes, of course, and summoned his fairy Tinkerbell so that he could sprinkle the children with magical pixie dust so they were able to make their flight to Neverland. Well, Tinkerbell was not happy about any of this. She was very, very jealous of Wendy and didn't like her stories. She gave Peter some of the dust and flew on ahead to Neverland. On her arrival, she gathered up the Lost Boys and told them that a very scary and dangerous animal was flying towards the island. The animal was called a Wendy bird, and Peter had ordered the Lost Boys to shoot the Wendy bird down. Well, the Lost Boys always followed Peter's orders, so as Wendy flew onto the island, the Lost Boys shot her out of the sky. Luckily, Wendy wasn't too hurt. But when Peter found out that Tinkerbell had tricked the boys, he was furious and banished her from Neverland. Meanwhile, the Lost Boys had adopted Wendy as a mother figure. They loved her stories and they didn't even mind that she made them take their medicine every night. Peter took the children on the most wonderful adventures. He showed them the magic of Mermaid Lagoon. He took them to an Indian camp. And he told them all about his arch nemesis, Captain Hook. Now, James Hook was a pirate who Peter had been fighting for years. During their last battle, Peter had chopped off Hook's hand and fed it to a crocodile. And ever since, the crocodile had been desperate to eat the rest of Hook. On hearing that Peter had brought 3 new children to the island, Hook was now more determined than ever to find Peter's secret hideaway. He had been searching for it for years. During one of his daily hunts for Peter's home, Hook came across a very upset Tinkerbell. He took advantage of the fairy's confusion, anger and sadness and persuaded Tinkerbell to tell him where Peter Pan's home was. Tinkerbell told Hook, but instantly regretted it and tried to fly away to warn Peter, but it was too late. Hook threw her into a tiny cage and locked the door and gathered up his pirate men to start the attack on Pan. Well, Hook and the pirates surrounded Peter Pan's hideaway. They barged through the door and kidnapped John, Michael, Wendy and all of the Lost Boys and took them on board the pirate ship. Peter, however, had been flying around the island looking for food and had escaped the kidnapping. Hook was furious. He was about to leave the hideaway when he noticed Peter's medicine bottle at the side of his bed. Hook, who always carried a deadly poison around with him, poured a few drops into Peter's medicine bottle, swished it around and put it back on his bedside, knowing that the deed was done. When Peter returned, he was confused to find all the children gone. "I must hunt them down," said Peter. "Oh, but first, I should really take my medicine before I go on another adventure." And so Peter picked up his medicine bottle, and just as it was about to touch his lips, Tinker Bell appeared and knocked the bottle out of his hand. She'd managed to escape from the cage and had tried to save Peter. "Tink," said Peter, "give me back my medicine. And anyway, you're supposed to be banished." The two fought over the bottle, and Tinker Bell, knowing how stubborn Peter was, decided there was nothing else to do except to drink the poison herself. And so she did. "Tink," said Peter, "why is your light going out?" Tinker Bell had just enough time to explain to Peter that Hook had tried to poison her, and now he'd kidnapped the children onto the boat. And then she lay there lifelessly. "Tink," Peter said. "Oh, Tink, you took that poison to save me and now you're dead." Peter didn't know what to do, so he began to cry. "I do believe in fairies," said Peter. And then he started to chant this over and over and over again. "I do believe in fairies. I do. I do. I do believe in fairies. I do. I do." And then all of a sudden, Tinker Bell's light started to glow. She flew up into the sky. Peter cheered with excitement. "Tinker Bell, you're alive! I am so sorry for banishing you. Now, Tink, let's go and save Wendy and the boys." And off they went. On board the pirate ship, Hook was making Wendy walk the plank. "Any final words, girl?" said Hook. "Peter will save us," said Wendy. Hook laughed. "Peter Pan cannot save you, for Peter Pan is dead." The children bowed their heads in sadness and knew they were in grave danger. "To die would be an awfully big adventure," said Peter with a smile as he flew above them all. The children cheered and battle commenced. The Lost Boys fought the pirates and Peter fought with Hook once again. And I'm very pleased to tell you that, of course, he won. He threw Hook into the sea for the crocodile to enjoy. Peter Pan had done it again. "Well done, Peter," said Wendy. "Thank you for such a wonderful adventure, but I do believe it's time for us to go home." And so Peter flew the children back to London. Wendy begged Peter to stay, but Peter couldn't. He didn't want to. He didn't want to grow up and become a man. So he waved the darling children goodbye for a final time and never came back to the window again. A few years later, Wendy moved out of the nursery, followed by John and then Michael, and eventually all three of them moved out of their family home. For all children must grow up eventually. Well, except one. Thank you so much for listening to that story. It is my favourite of all time. I'll be back soon with more stories. But in the meantime, everyone, stay safe. Goodbye.